Stefan Harben here, IronDPC.com, bringing you my lecture on disrespecting seed oils with real science. Let's jump right into it. We're going to start with the evidence for harm with seed and vegetable oils. We're going to reevaluate some of these older studies, right? Reevaluation of the traditional diet heart hypothesis, the Minnesota coronary experiment. Reevaluation showed that participants who increased their consumption of corn and margarine had a 68% more heart attack incidence, especially for those 65 and older. Use of dietary linoleic acid, also known as vegetable oils, for secondary prevention of coronary heart disease and death. Evaluation of the Sydney Diet Heart Study. So reevaluating this old study that gave us all of our guidelines. What did the reevaluation find? In this cohort, substituting dietary linoleic acid, aka vegetable oil, in place of saturated fats increased the rates of death from all causes, coronary heart disease and cardiovascular disease. Incidence of cancer in men on a diet high in polyunsaturated fat. We found that there is more of a cancer incidence in the vegetable oil group. Mind you, this two groups were compared. One was the conventional diet, which who knows what that means. We know that's already bad, with saturated fat. And then the other group specifically was given more polyunsaturated fat over time. They both died a lot, right? They had both equal amount of cardiovascular death. But the interesting part was the seed oil group died more of cancer causes. America's most widely consumed oil causes genetic changes in the brain. Remind you all that we like to say in medicine, it's your genetics, right? Well, here we can see an epigenetic change in mice fed soybean oil diets. The two soybean oil diets in these mice had similar but non-identical effects on the hypothalamic transcriptome, whereas the coconut oil diet had negligible effect compared to the low-fat control diet. Dysregulated genes were associated with inflammation, neuroendocrine, neurochemical, and insulin signaling. Let's look at some monkey studies. Depression and altered serum lipids in monkeys consuming a Western diet. So they gave some monkeys some more seed oils than others, and they found that although these monkeys were thinner, they had more depressive tendencies. And yes, monkeys can be depressed too. And they also had more cardiac disease. Rat studies here. Dietary lipid profile is determinant of tissue phospholipid fatty acid composition and rate of rat weight gain. Wow, say that quickly. Rats were divided into two different groups consisting of diets identical in fat, protein, carbohydrate, calories, so calorie controlled. The rats in the group receiving fat from safflower oil had a 12.3% increase in total body weight compared to rats eating traditional fats. Very cool. The Chungus study, I came up with that name. The study should have been called the Chungus study. So what they looked at was two sets of rabbits were treated with 1 and 2 mLs per kilogram a day of repeatedly heated vegetable oils, so commonly found in your restaurants at Popeyes, for instance, any chicken wing place. You know they're not changing that vegetable oil every day. They're recooking with it every day, day in and day out, hour by hour for a full month. I know some restaurants that do that. The third set of rabbits was given 1 ml per kilogram a day of a single heated vegetable oil. And let's look at what was happening with these rabbits. Repeated heat mixing. So following long-term oil treatment, the body and liver weight gain in the repeated heat vegetable oil group fed animals, both in high and low doses, was statistically significant in comparison with the control. In addition, the feeding efficiency of these treated animals was lesser than the single heated vegetable oil group rabbits. That may be clarified as nearly all amino acids react with oxidized lipids and their primary and secondary product, thus leading to decreased digestive utilization of amino acids, proteins, and fats, a contributing factor for weight gain. The weight variances among the oil feed groups are in line with Soyan Oria et al., which reported that fried edible products increase central adiposity and blood pressure. Other evidence of increased risk of obesity, reduced HDL cholesterol, and bigger circumference of the waist have been associated with the intake of food products processed in repeatedly heated oils. The results of our study, with increased body and organ weight, so fatty liver disease, but comparatively reduced food intake in the repeated heated oil-fed animals, are supported by other studies which reported the relationship between indigestibility and repeated heated oil consumption. This increased body weight might be possibly linked to the deprived pancreatic lipase effect of triglycerols, polymers, dimers, and oligomers present in thermally degenerated oils, as reported in a recent review. That's the Chungus study. They should call it a Chungus study. What's this? Let's see. Yeah, so accumulation of liver fat, which we know fatty liver disease can result in cancer. So essentially, repeated heating of oils cause cancer. Why isn't this all over the news? Why isn't Popeye's CEO being arrested? Why aren't these seed oil restaurants here? Why isn't the DEA? Why aren't the FDA going after these places? They're literally causing cancer and obesity in people. I don't know, right? That's a crime. Let's continue here. Lack of an association or an inverse association between low-density lipoprotein cholesterol and mortality in elderly, a systematic review. So we're going to get a little bit more into that as to why the cholesterol hypothesis is false a little bit later on in this presentation. Let's go on to the second part of this presentation, which is why were we told that saturated fat and meats is bad for you and butter was bad for you and that grains and seed oils are better. And this is going to be a bit of a history lesson. And it's going to be kind of interesting if you've never heard this story before. So the concept of grain and low fats is actually a religious doctrine by a religious sect known as the Seventh-day Adventists. And this was invented by Dr. Kellogg and a couple of his associates as a way to reduce impure sexual thoughts in their followers. And they identified that grain-based diets could achieve this, right? Unfortunately, the SDA are very powerful, right? They own, Advent Health. They're everywhere, and they produce a lot of these peer-reviewed publications that give them the results that they want to promote this. And they not only have the religious sect, which is the nonprofit, right? They have the health arm, right? They have all the hospitals. They're sanitariums. That's how they started out, and then they became the hospital systems. And then they started infiltrating the universities. They created their own universities. They created the researchers, the doctors, the nutritionists, who then went and did the studies to prove that this grain and seed oil-based diet is superior than traditional saturated fat and meat-based diets. So they got the literature to support that, and they put the researchers out there to prove it. And then they got these researchers to sit on advisory panels to make the recommendations that you all have been following for half a century or more, right? Here is, I believe this is Ellen White. She's a founder of the SDA and believed that diet could control sexual appetite and avoid sin. A very interesting article. I suggest everyone read this. The Global Influence of the Seventh-day Adventist Church on Diet. This is produced and published by the Seventh-day Adventists, kind of depicting their role in changing these guidelines for us over the past half century. So what did Canada do? So very interesting. Canada convinced the world to eat engine lubricant. So canola oil, Canada oil, canola oil. That's where you have that. Back in the 1960s, vegetable and margarine producers quickly exploited the AMA's consequent recommendation to replace butter and lard with vegetable oil. Nucoa and Fleischmann's margarines each claimed to be the highest in healthy polyunsaturated fats. General Mills claimed that the Safolife safflower oil, an oil that had previously been used mainly in varnish, solvents, and linoleum, had more polyunsaturated fats than any other oil. the major producer of safflower oil, rushed out with its own safflower oil products, whose ads began, "Read what the AMA says about the regulation of dietary fat." So soon, polyunsaturated oil was being touted as a health food in its own right. Harvard nutritionists said you got to swallow it 3 times a day to improve your health. So big industry was involved. So Canada's surplus of rapeseed oil that had been used for naval ships during World War II was marketed as canola oil for human consumption. Procter & Gamble, previously soap makers based off of cottonseed, started making oil for human consumption. So these are basically industrial waste products that didn't know what to do with anymore. Well, let's sell it to the American population. It is healthier. Push it through the government. Senate hearings led by the Dietary Goals for Americans policy, which gave us the food pyramid style recommendations of low saturated fat and high carbohydrate. That was 1976. So still pushing it there. Here's a little bit more of a diagram here. AHA recommending advice to replace saturated fat with polyunsaturated fat start back in 1960s. And you can see from the previous document, maybe that wasn't based so much in science. Maybe that was a little bit of industry wanting to get rid of some of these waste products. And still persisting to this day. Ansel Keys here, he promoted the great experiment, the lipid hypothesis. So back in the 50s, Ansel Keys correlated low cholesterol found in the blood of poor Italians with less heart attacks compared to wealthier businessmen in Italy who had high cholesterol and heart attacks. So he kind of started this little chain reaction. President Eisenhower in 1955 suffered a heart attack, bringing heart disease into the forefront of national attention. And we know how media sensationalizes things. So that was a huge sensational thing, and that helped Ansel Keys' literature get out there. 1960s, the AHA, which you saw, drew up the statement that says we've got to get rid of saturated fat from the American diet. We've got to get polyunsaturated fats in the diet. So the American Heart Association adopted this hypothesis. Let's put an end to the lipid hypothesis once and for all. If you look at recent guidelines, if you've been paying attention, the American College of Cardiology has finally come out and said that saturated fat doesn't cause heart disease. Thank God. They are saying, though, that the lipid fractionation panel is a little bit of a better predictive tool. And that's a story for another time, and I don't agree with this one entirely either. The Brits are onto this as well. They say saturated fat does not cause arteries. Coronary heart disease is a chronic inflammatory condition, the risk of which can be effectively reduced with lifestyle interventions. That I agree with. It is an inflammatory condition. Statins don't prevent mortality from heart attacks or strokes. This is a huge one. 231,000 patients admitted to the hospital systems with heart attacks and strokes. Half of them had a quote-unquote normal lipid panel, right? So what did this tell us? This tells us that what are we doing? Why are we chasing an LDL panel? Why are we trying to treat patients with Lipitor to lower LDL, right? We know from some of the studies here, you need to treat 104 patients with a statin to prevent 1 heart attack, right? 154 need to be treated to prevent a stroke, but the number needed to harm is much lower. 1 in 50 can be harmed by developing diabetes. 1 in 10 can be harmed with muscle damage, liver damage, right? And vegetable oils are actually harmful and may actually cause cardiac disease despite being lower in saturated fat. Right? We can see over time the increase of soybean oil in our diet, in these polyunsaturated linoleic acids. Our heart disease hasn't decreased. It's increased. It's the #1 killer of Americans still. So this saturated fat, this cholesterol hypothesis, whatever you want to call it, it's garbage. It must be discarded. And the sad reality is that millions of Americans suffer from these false narratives to lower meat consumption. Sarcopenia, muscle wasting from low amino acids, right? Poor muscle composition, right? Why is this? Well, one, they've been told to reduce meat intake. Red meat's bad for you, right? Saturated fat's bad for you. They've been told that. It's false, right? Low exercise, obviously, is another component. Low testosterone in men, that's a huge component, right? We know that low testosterone, that's a kind of a vicious cycle. More fat on the abdomen, lower testosterone. But we've been told to reduce cholesterol, right? Here's a hormone cascade. Cholesterol is the building block of testosterone, of all your hormones, right? We're not human without cholesterol. Cholesterol isn't evil, right? So what do we do about this, right? We can use recent conclusions from the British Medical Journal and even the American Heart Associations. They are on board with this. Saturated fat does not cause heart disease. It is inflammation. We have to lower inflammation, right? Lifestyle change. Seed oils must be eliminated from the American diet. There's no tolerable dose. If we look at some of these animal studies, there's no like a little bit here, a little bit there. You have to eliminate it completely, right? If you really want to eliminate the variables for depression, for inflammation, right? For visceral fat, for liver disease, right? Fatty liver disease. You have to eliminate it completely. There's no safe dose of Mazola corn oil. But this industry, it perpetuates because there's a lot of money involved. Billions of dollars want you not to know this. Billions of dollars in pharma to lower cholesterol, these statin drugs. There's a lot of momentum behind continuing this lipid hypothesis, right? Not only religious, yeah, the Seventh-day Adventists play a huge role in that too, with their religious doctrines, with their research that they're spreading. But billions of dollars in not only the statin drugs, but the rapeseed oil, canola oil, sorry, as more politically correct, the soybean oil, the corn oil industry, huge industry here, billions, we're talking maybe trillions of dollars sloshing around, wanting you to believe that saturated fat is bad and you need to replace it with these seed oils, right? So that's why I promote this literature here for everyone to read. You can click through the articles, you can read the research for yourself, but it's quite obvious that eating something super highly processed, heated up to extreme temperatures, reused day in and day out at restaurants, is absolutely toxic to the human body, cancerous, and it must be eliminated. Thank you for joining this lecture.